Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome. World Futures Day is kicking off. We're just giving it a minute or two, and we'll get started. Awesome, awesome. Thank you, thank you. Okay, I think with that shared screen, I will pass it over to our first moderator, MC, Young Voice. When you're ready, Manya.
Hi, thank you, Lisa. So welcome to World Futures Day, everyone, Young Voices 2025. So this session is brought to you by Teach the Future, which is a global nonprofit dedicated to embedding futures literacy in education worldwide. And World Futures Day is also a partnership with the Millennium Project. So right now, we are all part of a 24-hour global conversation about our futures, creating a space where all generations, especially young voices, can share their visions, concerns, and action-driven projects towards a better tomorrow. This is going to be streamed on YouTube, so let's make this conversation count. And also, as we proceed throughout the day, feel free to share your thoughts and join the global discussion using hashtag WFDYV. So facilitators, take it away.
Hello, hi, this is Carol. I'm a co-founder of the Teach the Future global nonprofit, the Singapore chapter here. A very warm welcome to so many of you who have joined us from all around the world, whether you are a youth, a young at heart, or not so youthful, but still, very youthful in your thinking and aspirations. So we welcome all of you. I also like to introduce you to my fellow facilitators for this first session that we are kicking off at the World Futures Day 2025. I have with me from Singapore my co-facilitator Louis Pua. Louis and I work together in two social enterprises related to youth development work. And our office is actually situated within a public school in Singapore, very much a one of a kind. I will let Louis say more about that later on as part of the section that he's co-facilitating. And I also would like to introduce you to Jun Hao Go, and that is, Jun Hao, you can say hi and unmute yourself if you would like to. Jun Hao is one of my mentees at one of the tertiary institutions here in Singapore. So I've known him for the past year, mentoring him and his teammates in some of the projects and the innovation work that they're doing. And interestingly, as we all know, I think that the World Futures Day conversations, it is it is all about young voices, but we would like to let the young take the lead, but it is actually in reality intergenerational conversations. So I thought that it would be interesting to just let everyone know that in this co-facilitator team that we have here, this is how we line up in terms of our multi-generations. So for me, I'm from the Gen X, right? Gen X in the room, raise your virtual hands. How many Gen Xers do we have here in the room, right? Okay. If you if you identify yourself as a Gen X, regardless of whatever year, you can just raise your virtual hands. That's great. And then Lewis comes from the millennials, Gen Y. Okay, Gen Y, raise your hands. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Okay, and then last but not least, we have Jun Hao, of course, representing Gen Zs. Right. Who are the Gen Zs in the room? Raise your hands. Woohoo. Okay, all right. So regardless of which generations that we come from, I think we are here really in this very open space today for us to have this safe space to have this very brave conversations about what are some of the observations that Louis and myself have took note of in the various aspects of our work related to young people and multi-generational workspaces. Okay, thank you so much for those in the chat. Yes, feel free to pop comments into the Zoom chat or questions. We will take note of them, and we hope to address them as we go along. We will also be dropping the Miro link in the Zoom chat as well. So this is meant to be a fully interactive session, and we welcome you to be part of the conversation in whichever way feels most convenient or most conducive, or you feel most comfortable with. So you can always pop your question and pop your comments into the Zoom chat. If it's convenient for you to join us online on the Miro collaboration board, please do, because there will be post-its where, we have some thought-provoking prompts that can guide your reflection, and we would love to hear your thoughts, and you can write them on the post-its on the Miro board as well. So let me set the scene very quickly for today and start us rolling. We are here really to explore, and we will invite everyone to explore with us what we've been observing as gaps in preparing young people for the future that they will step into and they will inherit. And we see this particular area of gap show up in different ways in different contexts. For me personally, I not only do youth development work, but I also work with companies and organizations, including global MNCs, the HR department, the L&D department, the people and culture departments, on looking at how we can better bridge the gaps in intergenerational awareness, and sometimes even leading to disagreements and conflict in the workplace itself, right? And very often in my conversations and discussions with the people, the working professionals, certain biases come up, certain very obvious lack of empathy between the generations come up. Going beyond just understanding personal biases and assumptions that could cause problems in intergenerational understanding, I think personally as a futurist, I also zoom out to try and look at data and research and trends in other areas beyond the workplace that could potentially provide some clues as to where some of these underlying causes of the kind of very divisive opinions about each other's generation could come from, right? And I think I want to just very quickly bring up certain stats, which I do trust that some of you would be also quite familiar with because they have appeared a lot in media and social media. So let's take a very quick look at global figures. And I will start off with like global workplace related figures. This just happened in Singapore. The LinkedIn Talent Connect Asia conference just took place in Singapore here earlier this week. And the LinkedIn chief economist, Karen Kimbrough, actually said, based on their research, in today's world, more than 10% of professionals globally hired today have jobs that didn't exist as recent as 5 years ago. So this is just at the start of when the pandemic happened, right? And then today already you have more than 10% of people working in jobs that didn't exist just 5 years ago. Now, if we look into the future itself, World Economic Forum back in 2023 already has told us that 65% of the children entering primary school today will work in jobs that don't yet exist. Okay, and moving along, World Economic Forum also said that, interestingly, of all the reskilling that needs to be done by this year, and this will hit at least 50% of employees globally, the fastest growing skills that are needed in the workplace these days are not what we might expect it to be, even about things like AI and technical skills. It is actually self-management and active learning. Okay. Moving on, now we look on at how employers and employees view these skills gaps. From various international organizations, surveys, World Economic Forum, as well as UNESCO, they pointed out that 80% of employers actually value life skills. Again, that same stats appearing itself and reinforcing. However, the majority of employers also believe that the young people stepping into the workplace today actually lack these critical life skills such as problem solving, adaptability, creativity, and communication, and that they do not seem to have been adequately cultivated in many education systems around the world. Interestingly, on the other hand, let's hear from the teachers themselves. The teachers have also been researched and surveyed to have found out that about two-thirds of them globally feel that they are quite ill-equipped to teach social emotional skills. So some of these kind of life skills to do with social emotional learning, right? So that data came from OECD. And what about the young people themselves? Okay, globally, 1 in 3 people feel unprepared for the world. They're worried about life after school, they're worried about life direction and purpose, and also career prospects and pathways. And this leads on to increased stress, anxiety, and uncertainty, which is why it's no wonder that UNICEF in 2022 already found that 1 in 7 youth globally struggles with mental health issues. And I think this really was also exacerbated by the global pandemic that we all experienced. Where we come from here in Singapore, I think we have similar stats that really reinforce these trends that we've been observing from around the world. This is taken from the National Youth Survey that's done by the National Youth Council in 2022 for Singapore youth. And they found out that the top 3 youth source of stress, right, comes from uncertainty about the future, emerging adult responsibilities to do with adulting, as well as things to do with finances, including this professed lack of ability to know how to manage money, how to do budgeting, how to plan for long-term financial goals. And out of these 3 top stresses, uncertainty towards the future remains in the top spot. And you can see from the stats that actually across all 3 factors, there's been an increasing worsening of the situation from the last time that the survey was done in 2019. At this point in time, we'll take a pause so that you will bring other voices into the room. And we just would like to invite Jin Hao first to start us rolling. Jin Hao, as being the youth co-facilitator in this session, I wonder when you, and being the Gen Z representative, right? When you see some of these stats here, I wonder what are your thoughts triggered by these stats? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think that they are a correct representation of what your experience and maybe the experience of your peers?
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Junhao. So even before I go into the stats itself, right, I would just give a quick introduction about myself. So I'm currently serving my national service in Singapore. It's a compulsory 2 years program, we can call it, right? That all males have to serve their national service in order to become like a full Singaporean, right? So before that I was studying biomedical engineering. So I did a diploma in biomedical engineering at a poly called Nanyang Polytechnic. And basically I'm a STEM enthusiast lah. So I really believe in really the innovation and creativity side of things. And yeah, and I'm also quite a strong advocate for futures thinking. That's why I agreed to this when Carol invited me to share more about us youths really having life skills to really carry us forward in our future. And okay, so looking at the stats itself, right? I'm just wondering, only 1 in 7 youths. I think a lot of the Gen Zs can really back me up on this, right? 1 in 7 youths, more like 4 in 7 youths. I feel like personally struggle with mental health issues. Even personally for myself when I was studying back in the day, right? I really faced a lot of challenges. I had a lot of mental struggles with academics, and there wasn't really a strong support group that I had to really um that I had to really carry myself forward and to really uh bridge that connection between a teacher and a student. So yes, it really felt like I have been in this journey alone. And I think maybe we are moving more towards a direction where collaborative learning is, of course, utmost important. But I think there are still areas of improvement that we can work on. And yeah, for the top one in three young people worldwide feels unprepared for the future. Uh, I feel that that stats is also uh quite understated because I feel like as youths right now, right, a lot of us we are so uncertain about what we want to do in the future, with especially the involvement or the expansion in technological advancement, right? So we talk about AI in healthcare, AI in education, or even we are coming to an era where quantum is becoming more and more popular. So quantum computing, all of this type of new technological advancements going to take over our job in the future. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty as a youth to really um look towards a future where these all these advancements might somehow or someday take over our jobs. So yeah, so uh for the teachers itself, I can't really give comments lah because I'm not been a teacher myself. Uh But yeah, 65% of children entering primary school today will work in jobs that will exist. I don't know how true is that. The number might start increasing might start decreasing as there are more AI jobs that are coming in, right? So now in Singapore, right, we literally have like half our population wanting to study computer science because it's such a hot topic, and that itself is really saying a lot that we did not learn computer science back then, but only recently in the recent years, like 3 4 years ago, it suddenly become popular, and then after it popularized, then all of a sudden everybody wants to study that. So it's really based on global trends lah, and based on what is in it in the industry right now. And I would even say now it's an over fluctuation of computer science um people that study computer science as compared to all the other industries out there lah. So yeah, so I think that's all from me. Okay, you can pass the time to Louis to also share more on the teachers side of
I
things.
guess. Oh, sure. Hi, I'm Louis. I work a lot with educators. I won't talk too much about my work, but focus on what we are looking here, right? About teachers and whether they feel equipped to teach these social emotional skills for the future. Um, I don't want to comment because I think teachers are amazing people. They are so skilled to manage the stresses every single day with the students they work with. But maybe another way I can probe on that for Junhao, right, is um not so much about their ability to teach it, but did you have many instances of being able to learn it through classes, through school, and your teachers kind of teaching about social emotional skills? It's not so much about the skills, right? But more about whether you got the chance to learn about them.
Hmm. Okay, so when we talk about life skills itself, right? It's I would say it's quite vastly different from soft skills. So soft skills itself, we think about like interpersonal relationship, communication, teamwork, all those type of skills. I mean, when we talk about life skills itself, right, it's really about the ability that helps the individual to navigate in like daily challenges lah. So like decision making, critical thinking, problem solving, all these are of life skills lah. So I just want to like put it out there that there's a clear this there's a clear difference between life skills and soft skills. Because life skills itself is more of an independent learning and personal success as compared to soft skills where it's just about your interpersonal abilities to do something, right? And and of course when I bring into the aspects of school, whether did they train me up for it, did they use any techniques or whatsoever to really broaden or um educate me on life skills? I would say yes, there are good and bad of things lah, right? So of course, in school, I think many of us can relate that we often need teamwork, right? Teamwork, collaboration to really for work in a project and really come up with a solution, come up with a problem statement that we have to do to solve a certain issue. And I think that has been really well taught in schools. Really just about even forming teams, forming I would even say even very back then when I was still in the primary school like area, right? When I was still like 10, 11 years old, there was already kind of collaborative learning where everybody in the class would form teams of 5 to solve a maths problem, for example. And that itself is really showing the beginning of having teamwork itself, right? And of course, when we talk about good things of life skills that were being taught in school, I would say time management, right? So time management is something that is taught at a very young age. How do we manage our time well? How do we set timetables? How can we plan a fixed deliverable every day such that we don't lag behind in tasks, right? And I feel that are some really good ways that schools have been trying to advocate for bridging life skills with future thinking, and they should continue doing that lah. Um, in contrary, right, on maybe not so good side that I feel that schools are lacking in is one thing, I don't know about the rest of the countries, but I can say that in Singapore, right, we do often uh not be taught on the emotional intelligence side of things. So, what does that mean, right? What do I mean by we are not being taught emotional intelligence? It has always been about academic learning, right? So it has always been about, oh, how do we solve this maths problem? How do we do this English question, right? Or how do we do this geography question? There's always a very primary focus on just solving X, solving Y, but it has never been about really just connecting emotional intelligence with academic intelligence itself. So I know many of my friends, they do lack emotional intelligence. So when it comes to like really talking to friends, they feel very socially awkward. They don't know what to do in that situation. They don't know how to really work together at some instances. So I feel like it's very crucial for us as youths to be really brought out in our emotional intelligence. And yeah, on top of that, right, financial literacy, right, is something that I do feel that is often lacked or not talked about. Um, we often feel that okay, it's not enough. Our current curriculum in school, there's really not enough like bandwidth or space to talk about financial literacy. We don't really plan for our future, right? We don't really plan that, oh, in the future when we buy a house, we need this certain amount of money, or in the future when we have kids, like um what what are some of the important things to note such that we can plan for our future well, right? And that are just some things that really came across my mind when I was looking at the stats as well as when you brought up the question itself, lah. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for sharing. And I essentially was trying to ask Jinhao about his point of view because as much as the schools may want to teach, there's also an element of does the student end up learning? I often see this meme shared in, especially in the American space, right? Because America's so good at creating memes. But teachers talking about how uh, when young people say that they didn't learn life skills, many teachers respond to say, we did teach them, you were not listening. So it's kind of a back and forth of trying to figure out how do we do this better? Because if at the end of the day, the life skills or soft skills may not have been picked up, then there is some gap we have to fill. I wanted to share some interesting data here now. So there's this guy in Singapore called Lee Hong Yi. He's the director of this organization called Open Government Products. They're an extremely innovative organization in Singapore that is within the public sector, pretty much operating like a startup, looking for problem statements on the ground and pulling together tech teams to solve them. What he did as a personal pet project was to do a survey on the effectiveness of education. The survey questions that he asked looks like this. What were some of the most useful things that people learned in schools? They could choose a variety of subjects if they wanted, or even key in others. On top of that, they would be invited to elaborate on the specific topics that they found was useful and kind of fill in some demographic data and information, including what jobs these adults filling in this survey are currently working as. As he came out with this data, there's a really interesting graph that emerged after that. I am telling everybody that I know in Singapore how important this graph is because it is, if you're in the tech space, It's the UAT side of things, the user acceptance testing. When we get young people who finish their educational journey to come into adulthood, we need some kind of barometer to measure whether education has done a good job of preparing these young people for adulthood. I don't want to say it's all about jobs. It's also about how do we relate to each other, emotional intelligence, like Jinhao has said. And so this is then a very powerful and important chart. We're also looking at measuring this not from the perspective of PISA scores of literacy and critical thinking alone. We're looking at life objectives. Just as a fun but sad fact, one of the big worries in Singapore is our extremely low birth rate. Our birth rate right now is below 1, which means for every couple, we only produce less than 1 child. We are below replacement rate for our country. That is a big problem. And one of the roots and stems of this comes also from social and interpersonal skills, whereby people are finding it harder and harder to date. I think it's a global phenomenon, but given our minuscule birth rate in Singapore, it's quite existential. So let me just come down to this chart that you're seeing in front of you. The green bars represent what the respondents felt was most useful in what they learned. The red bar represents what they felt was least useful, and the blue one represents what people wished they had learned more. And the conclusion that Hong Yi came up with was that personal financial literacy was a huge gap. It was by far the topic and the area of knowledge young people wish school would have covered more of. Coming up after that would be self-care and stress management, social and interpersonal skills. And following that, we start to see subjects like computing. Jinhao mentioned that half of the country wants to pursue computer science now, and this is where this desire is coming from. That desire comes from the growing tech trends in AI, in cybersecurity, which if we take on a futures lens, we may want to pump the brakes a little bit on this, because whether or not there's going to be as many tech jobs, it's not a surefire answer to say that's yes. I also want to help us interpret this data a little bit, because even though it is said that chemistry is least useful, and we even see moral education being a lot of people responding that it is the least useful. One of the things that we have interpreted is to understand that it might not be that the topic is not useful, but that perhaps it was not taught effectively, and therefore the lessons were the least useful. So then that's where we really want to look at the blue bars to tell us what people wish they had more of. So this is the data that we have, and I'm really curious about, if you are interested to access the full data, you can click on the icon here to access the full data to take a look. Just so you know, this data is not a huge formal research. It is looking at it from an informal kind of perspective. Hong Yi continues to try to collect more data, but this is really the start of a process of trying to evaluate education in a different way. So in this, I thought it's useful to leave some food for thought. For the youth among us in the room, what were some life skills you wish you had learned in school in order to help you navigate the changes in your life? And for the adults, what were some life skills that you learned in school, or perhaps you didn't learn in school and you wish you would have learned that helped you to navigate? We might not have explicitly mentioned this just now, but with every board we show, there's going to be some post-it notes right at the bottom. Feel free to come onto this page and access this. For those of you who might not be able to access, let me send that link into the chat so that you're able to come onto this page to type in any thoughts that you might be having about this. Okay, so here we have an adult response here. Studied economics focused in an economics focused high school. All subjects were useful, like law, budgeting, and statistics. My own comment on this at times is, and I'm calling back to what I mentioned earlier, where schools do teach things, but whether students were listening, that's a real challenge. So I think it continues to be a challenge where even if we bring these topics up, how do we help the students to find value in it? Okay, I also wanted to just bring in a voice from Scott Jordan in the chat, who mentioned that wanted to push back on the graph, wondering if people can easily determine whether what they learned has become important or not. Our grown-up lives are so complex and integrated, you may not realize how helpful chemistry class is in your everyday life unless you stop to think about it. Is there something backing up how they discuss this with those that were surveyed? For clarity, the people filling in these responses are mostly adults who work in different spaces. We may see their responses differ depending on the career choices that they make. I agree that in some subjects, for example, chemistry, we might learn a more structured way of thinking or a scientific process. I often use the example of the scientific method and A/B testing, which is used in marketing. In marketing, we do A/B testing to test which versions of a product or a website is effective, but that knowledge came from a scientific method of wanting to use quantifiable data in order to make better decisions. Sabrina also brought up an interesting point here about moral education, but by which worldview? Certainly much has changed between how teacher generation understands and practices morals, especially with so many adults being publicly cancelled for nefarious acts. So this is where I start nerding out, because I think when it comes to moral education, ethics education, we often get hung up about what is the right conclusion to make from a moral situation. That is what moral education has tended to be in the past. Here in Singapore, what the work Carol and I are trying to do is to help people see that it is not so much about which moral perspective is right or wrong, but more about how do we critically analyze and come to a somewhat democratic decision of consensus that this is the direction we want to go. If we cannot come together, it doesn't matter who is right or wrong. We are always going to form enemies. So then the moral education that we're talking about is how do we use our intellect and critical thought to come together? If the conclusion of our moral education divides us, then that's kind of off track. We can go a little bit meta about whether being cohesive and together is being biased or representing a certain worldview. But that becomes a whole philosophical argument that I don't think we have time today for. All right, so perhaps what we can do next, given our interest in time, is to move on to our next segment. One thing that we wanted to explore in this next segment is perhaps defining what do we mean by life skills? What are some of these things that we think perhaps is worth learning more about in school, at home, in society, and otherwise? It's kind of calling back to this survey data and how it was done. I'm not obsessed with the conclusions. I'm more obsessed about how it has allowed us as citizens, as people, to form a judgment or make a decision about what we want to learn, what we don't want to learn as much, and so on. So perhaps where we can do in this next segment is to come over to this side of the board and take some post-its, digital post-its, and type in what are some of these skills or knowledge. Let me just amend that, right? Knowledge that you feel we could spend a bit more time in. Okay, I'm going to stop talking to give you some time to do this.
And I think if anyone prefers to speak rather than just type into the post-it, we also welcome you to unmute your mic. For the rest of us who would prefer to just type into Zoom chat or into the post-it, please keep your mic muted just so that we can have a conducive environment to hear those who are sharing. So yeah. Feel free to
If you
unmute your
prefer to
mic
speak at this moment, feel free to speak. I'm happy to take your point into a post-it so you can keep your hands free.
So awesome to see so many engineers in the chat. I just wanted to mention that I've been reading the chat and wow, a lot of like-minded individuals here today. So if you have any questions, I mean, not just on engineering, but if you have any questions in general, just feel free to send it in the Zoom chat. We'll be sure to answer it. Yeah. maybe while people are writing down their definition of life skills, we can answer some of them just to really get the ball rolling, right? So the first question is, hey Gen Z, how do you show up and how may other generations show up for you? Share to connect us, right? So how do I connect with personally, how did I connect with Carol is through a mentorship program that I had in my polytechnic. So I was going through a pitching competition, so I came up with a product related to AI. So it was helping to mitigate falls in hospital environments. So essentially it helps to basically detect between what a unsteady person is and what a steady person in using like computer vision. So computer vision is basically using AI installed onto like a camera, and then it will be able to detect like skeleton detection lah. And from there it will give like early detection and early prevention of falls. Yeah, so how I met Carol was through a mentorship program. Um, she decided to take me under her wings, which I'm really, really appreciative of. Uh, from there we really connected well because I'm a I'm a chit chatter lah. I talk a lot. So as a youth, actually, I talk way more than other like my other friends lah. So in a way, I really connected very well with Carol. She really taught me a lot of life skills. She taught me a lot of soft skills that would help me improve on the speaking side of things lah. So interpersonal side of things and the communication as well. Um, in the future, how are we able to connect with other people from the Gen X or millennial like side of things, right? Is I feel that social media has been very, very strong these days. So example is like LinkedIn, right? So if let's say you're interested in a certain industry or certain, like for example engineering, right, you can go and connect with other professionals in the engineering sector, drop them a message, ask them if they can share some tips, share some advice. If not, you can always call them to meet up for a chat or just a quick back and forth message to really learn more about what these Gen X and millennial people are doing nowadays. Like, and of course, when we talk about connections, when we build more connections, we also get better stepping stone as a youth, so that in the future we are more prepared for what's to come, right? Yeah. Next question. Yeah. Carol, do you want to answer the next question?
I'm just wondering whether anyone would like to
Yeah.
speak as well. Is there anyone from the audience? I believe Amna and Lisa have already allowed for everyone to be able to unmute yourselves. So if you prefer to speak or to, elaborate on what you have put into the post-its. I mean, I see very interesting
Hello.
inputs, economic decisions, learning to learn, right? And how to deal with life uncertainties. And I think Sabrina will probably say, yes, future consciousness and future foresight is the answer to how you deal with life uncertainties.
I see someone raising up their
Oh,
hands. So would you
Oh,
like to
sure.
unmute and
Ja,
ask the question? Jahagir Mamtas. Sorry if I butchered your name.
are you able to unmute yourself, Jahangir? You've got a razor. Or if Jahangir is trying to
Yeah,
resolve the
if
mute
it
issue,
doesn't work,
then
maybe
maybe,
Scott.
yeah, maybe Scott can go. Scott, are you able to unmute?
I think I am, but Jahangir might
Yes.
have figured it out too.
Okay. Oh, yes.
So
Jahangir, you want to go first? Okay, maybe Scott, take it away first. We'll come back to
okay.
Jahangir.
Yeah. So well, Peter and I are having a wonderful conversation about chemistry and finances, and which I think is very important. And but the point I wanted to make, so there's like we're stuck in a weird balancing act, I think, with education. And because I've talked to so many university professors who are like, please just give me students who can add, multiply, subtract, divide, put together sentences, write paragraphs, who can read a book for crying out loud, because that's a huge problem in the US. And I think it's becoming a global problem as well with all of our screens. and do kind of basic stuff. Although I would add to that, definitely personal finance is huge because I think a lot of us we're subject to scams these days that are not like what our parents had to deal with. But we should know how to do some of that, and maybe our parents don't teach us that as much as they might have used to have done, or maybe money's just much more complex than it used to be. But at the same sense, I also think there needs to be a nice exposure in kind of primary, secondary level education so that because you don't know the things like I feel like in a survey you may not think I use chemistry as an example because I'm like, well, how often do I think of acid bases, titration, elements? And I'm like, well, actually, you think about it quite a bit, if you're thinking about how to make food taste a little bit better, or if you're trying to balance your diet, or if you're trying to you're trying to shovel your front driveway. There's a lot of chemistry from snow, those of you who experience that. I think it's little bits and ways, and I think Lewis, you mentioned the scientific method as well. I think that we often use that, we experiment, and not just with like doing a whole scientific experiment. We experiment with each other, right? We see how far we can take a conversation or how far we can do this and that. And so I think all of that thinking is very important, but how do we get a lovely base so that then and you can go to any university in the world and really learn about something or really develop a career pathway. So that's just the thing I add.
Thank you so much, Scott. I love what you're saying because what you're talking about the scientific method. There's that Einstein quote, right? Like about not doing something again and again. If it doesn't work, you have to try something else. So, and I'm really curious about how do we take these lessons and transplant them into a different field or area. So for example, we might be doing a scientific experiment, we try different methods and we get the outcome we want. But in Singapore, the work I'm trying to do with some youth is how do you do that with your parents? If you want to hang out with your friends and your argument about how you don't want to feel left out is not working, perhaps you can try a different method. Perhaps you can introduce your friends to your parents. Perhaps you can share with them what is your agenda for your outing with your friends. Perhaps these different methods will get you to the outcome you want. And that's kind of what we are interested in for now. And I'm really talking about it from the middle to high school age group of students, because that's where Carol and me spend a lot of time in. But I fully agree with you about primary education, elementary education. Some of these foundations we really shouldn't mess with because you want them to read, you want them to count and do their basic math. Thanks for the contributions. I think there's pretty rich conversations going on, and I really appreciate that. But I do want us to move on as well. So let me take it on to our kind of last segment. For now, I've briefly kind of teased this in Singapore, and Carol mentioned it. Carol and I, we run an organization called Creator, and the really unique setup we have is that we are physically located inside of a public secondary school. For the international audience, it's kind of like high school kind of age group. Students are between 13 to 16. We find that in this age group, puberty is coming in full swing. Self-identity is coming in full swing. Rebelliousness is coming in and mentorship becomes relevant. We found many of these life skill challenges. Reading is one of them, but a bigger deal is how do they relate to each other? Why are two best friends constantly bullying each other, thinking that they hate each other, but actually from the outside, they're the closest friends to each other, even though they keep poking at each other. They don't know how to relate to each other because they are used to that kind of aggressive, confrontational experiences. And we haven't often stepped back to unpack this dynamic of social interactions. They haven't thought too much about their futures. When we casually survey students about how much money do they think they need to cover their expenses or for basic survival in adulthood, they talk about the closer to a 5-digit amount of money just to make a living. In Singapore dollars and US dollars are not too far apart. So it's around that upper like $5,000 to $8,000 just to survive. When it comes to things like cost of living, affording a house, they talk about being unable to afford that. but the policies have not actually changed. The public housing market in Singapore, which is, by the way, about 80% of housing in Singapore is public housing, prices have not changed that dramatically. What we have come to realize is that while there is a lot more public discourse over social media, over online news, a lot of anxiety and pressure starts coming into the forefront, but there's not a lot of support in how do we help students to make sense of what's going on. So the work we do so far in schools have been to help students be more connected to the world, where teachers in Singapore start their day at 6 a.m. and they end their day at 6 p.m., 12-hour job. They don't often have the bandwidth and time to bring students into the outside of a classroom environment. And that's where we kind of play our part. Like Carol mentioned, we are kind of one of a kind in Singapore at very least to do this work. Because of this, we have been developing a curriculum of sorts, which we kind of title the School of Life for now. I know there's a UK setup with the similar name, but the objective here is really how do we get young people to pick up some of these life skills, these foundational mindsets and capabilities to prepare them for the future. Some of these topics include metacognition. How do you see yourself from a third party? I sometimes use this very crude and visual image of how we are just these brains in meat bodies. How do we step back from that meat body and decide how can we control this body and make it do what we would like it to do, rather than get consumed by our habits instead and our impulses. So there are other topics about learning how do businesses even make money? Why do some jobs pay more and why do some jobs pay less? Investing is also important knowledge. Many young people, unfortunately, especially with cryptocurrency and NFTs, have come to conclude that investing is just another form of gambling, legal gambling. Some might argue that that is actually what it is, but among the professionals, you know, there's a lot more research and backing behind that in how investments actually work. But these are not explicitly taught, and yet we expect every adult to be doing some form of investment. But where would they have learned it? On top of this, we do things like bringing people on company visits. We build up on their social skills as well. This is still in a pilot stage. We are working on this. We are trying to figure out how do we prepare young people for the lives that are ahead of them. So if you are interested in this work, feel free to connect with us and let us know your thoughts. We also have some food for thought here, which we would welcome your thoughts and inputs below. For example, what new ways can schools communicate and teach life skills for future challenges? Or how can youth and adults collaborate, work together, so it's not like an adult is teaching? I saw a quote earlier. I'm just going to scroll back and I want to say, I see you. Every generation imagines itself to be more intelligent than the one that went before it, wiser than the one that comes after it. I completely agree. This is a quote that's constantly on my mind. And even as Carol was talking about Gen Zs and involving Jinhao, I'm constantly wondering, what forms of judgment have we always applied to people across generations? And I'm curious, how might people of different generations be learning together? We might have strengths here and there, but how do we acknowledge that our juniors have skills that we don't as well and honor that? So I'm just gonna leave us. Okay, Carol, sorry.
No, I just thought that I would just add to what Louis has shared. I think for us at the School of Life, as Louis pointed out, that we are prototyping the curriculum. We are also prototyping how we are delivering and designing the experience. And I think one of those things that we are conscious about is how do we deliver and design it in such a way that it doesn't make young people feel like they are just attending school as usual, right? Because we want them to start approaching this critical life skills education with a different set of lens as well. I think the other thing, so we do a lot of more experiential learning. I think that's part of that prototyping. How do we bring it across with more embodied experiences so that they don't just learn it in their heads, but they learn with their hearts, they learn with their body. The other thing that I think is also part of that prototyping experience is co-creating it with the young people themselves. So it's not just about us thinking that we know best how to teach life skills to young people, but really finding out from young people how they would like to learn this. What's the most effective way of learning it? And what are the questions that constantly bug them about, how better to make decisions, navigate life, make friends, um, even know, like how do they even get to become more self-aware, socially aware, situationally aware? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I could share just a very quick food for thought as well, right? And I think since we're on the topic on like how can youth and adults collaborate to spread life skills education worldwide, I think we live in an era. I mean, during my days when I was still studying, right, it's often that teachers, or professors, teach students, right, teach students how to do a certain topic, certain subject, or a certain skill. It's never about the youths having a say in anything, right? So it's always been about um, teaching, and then there's no reciprocation on that, right? So I think in the future, right, um, as we go towards a more collaborative society, we would definitely want the youths to be empowered, right? So often you hear empowerment, not overpower, right? So we need we need adults, or what's it called, teaching adults especially, right, to empower the youths, not overpower them, right? It's about really learning together in a classroom. It's really about sharing experiences, and from the back and forth of communication, I feel that that's really one way that we can go forth in spreading life skills. And then that's where we can start bridging soft skills, interpersonal relationships, right, emotional intelligence. All these sort of things would work um when teachers take the first step to empower their students, give them a voice, right? Give them um make it opinionated, right? It's not about just okay, you do this, you do that, right? It's more about okay, let's share, let's have a group discussion on how we can go forward on this. Yeah. And that's how I personally feel. Um and yeah, and of course if we can really how to say, if we can really use, for example, subjects like chemistry, right? What Jordan was mentioning earlier. If you can relate it to real life examples, it would definitely be much better, right? Because I remember studying chemistry back in school. It has always been about memorization. Okay, memorize titration, right? Memorize the 6 steps of titration. That that was just very taxing. It was just okay. Step one, put add 115 ml to a beaker. Like that's really very pure memorization, and it doesn't help, right? But when you actually relate it to a real life example, right, then that's when it actually starts becoming a core memory. And then people, or I would say specifically the youth, they will start enjoying the process of things. Yeah. Thank you.
I love a story I heard, not from a teacher, but from a parent. And I thought it's appropriate because Valerie just talked about parents and how emotional intelligence starts with parents, right? I love this story because it was a pro tip from a parent. This parent was sharing about how whenever you ask your kids, how was school? You typically don't get a response. It was okay, just like every other day. You're not going to get much of a response. So this mom did something really interesting. She role modeled for her child. So instead of asking, how's your day? The mom kind of shared about her day instead. So instead of, so as her daughter came back, she asked, how's your day? The daughter said, it was okay. Then the mom said, can I share with you about my day? And the daughter's like, okay, sure. And she shared about the interactions she had with her friends, her colleagues. She shared about the challenges she faced at work. She asked her daughters for inputs. How do I deal with this colleague who doesn't want to work on this thing? Do you face that in school? How do you deal with this colleague who's fighting with this other colleague? What do we do with that? So I thought and the amazing thing is I've been tracking this family for a while, and they are pretty much of an outlier when it comes to an Asian family right now because they are really emotionally close. They go for therapy together, not because they have problems, but because they want to build their relationship. They are able to have these open conversations, and parent was really a great role model for the children as to how they can interact better together and build their interaction. So I do think that there's a lot we can do about role modeling, and I'm curious, what do our teachers role model beyond subject expertise? What might they role model in terms of curiosity or openness, humility? I'm very sure that people will have it, but how intentional are we in demonstrating that? Okay, so I'm mindful of time. I've also been reminded that we only have about 3 minutes left. So I'm just gonna leave a way for us to keep in touch here. Feel free to scan and connect with us on LinkedIn. Happy to continue this conversation moving on. I'm personally really excited if any of you are doing School of Life type work in your countries. We have so much we want to learn as well. Yeah, should I pass it back to Manya or Carol? Do you want to have any closing remarks as well?
I think that comment about parents is really pretty triggering. As a parent here, with kids in from Gen Y, Gen Z to Gen Alpha, um, I would say that not all parents are definitely as enlightened and conscious. Maybe enlightened is not the word. As aware and conscious as the friend that Louis mentioned. I think many parents probably need to go through some kind of a parenting education ourselves. Um, I have 4 kids myself. I would say that I feel that I learn from parenting every one more kid. And then I try not to make the mistakes that I made with the uh, older kids, with the younger one. So I
Or I
would say
guess
that
that
it's
every kid forces you to unlearn something as well that you
true,
thought would
that
have
as
worked.
well. That's true. That's true. They're all very different. But I would say that I can definitely see that of the 4 kids that I have, it's the youngest one who is most maybe emotionally attuned and emotionally intelligent. And I think it really comes from the kind of the kind of relationship, parent-child relationship that I have, that I keep refining, the kind of conversations that I have with each kid as I keep refining them and learning and making mistakes and then unlearning, relearning, and all that. So, yes, my younger kids got to benefit from that. And very sorry for the eldest one who bear the brunt of all the experimentation and prototyping that happened when I was a first-time parent. I don't know whether any other parents in the group want to say any final last words rather than hearing from us. We're happy to let the audience have the last word.
Not, we can let Junhao close us too. Future is in his hands.
Yeah, very insightful conversation today. Even as a youth, I learned a lot. I think it's never about just stagnating, right? Right. It's never about just stagnating and just being at a fixed point. It has always been about going up as a linear increasing graph, right? So life has so many more tough challenges along our way. And I say that as youths of not just tomorrow, but today, we gotta really start thinking about our futures and start honing these life skills along the way. And I feel like um more of this type of conversation would really help bridge future with youths as well as the different generations with us Gen Zs. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed today's
Thanks, everybody.
session. Yep.
Yeah, thank you so much to our 3 facilitators today for such an inspiring session. So, and thank you to everyone that was listening in today as well for being part of World Futures Day. And your perspective and participation have made this conversation truly meaningful. But the journey doesn't end here. New facilitators and fresh conversations are beginning at the top of each hour, and you're most welcome to stay and continue exploring future possibilities with us. So just a few quick announcements to end the session. So first, Teach the Future is offering our first FutureWise intro into Futures Literacy Fundamentals online courses. We have the Summer Institute for ages 12 through 17, and another course coming this fall for those who are 18 and older, and pre-registration is now open. Secondly, we'd love to hear about your experience. To share your feedback and receive your certificate of participation, please fill out our survey, and I'll be sharing the links in the chat now. Thank you.